I believe I'm going to make another look at it tomorrow, but I believe I've gone through all your grades should be finalized. If you see anything that is a problem, let me know. Um, but the grades should all be taken care of. I think I've got all the missing assignments in. Um, so we're good with that. All right. So to start off with, we are going to watch something real quick. Maybe, maybe not. No, stop. Okay, stop sharing this. Hold on a second. I don't. Yeah, okay. There we go. Try that one more time. All right, a little frustrating. It is popping on me a little bit. Hopefully, you guys heard that somewhat. So, I think most of you have probably have seen the movie Lion King, whether it's the uh, version from back when I was a kid or the new version out there. You know, it's basically the same story told over again. Carson, you doing all right today? I did say Carson. Good to hear that. So, Carson, what is Mufasa actually talking about when he says the circle of life? Right. The when they decompose in the grass, the producers absorb the material, and then the herbivores and so on down the line. Yeah. So it basically what it's saying is that we are all connected. So, oops, let me share this. So today, what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be discussing the flow of energy, or we're going to start discussing the flow of energy through an ecosystem. So, we watched a little intro to The Lion King. So, the next thing is, I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. So, again, we're going to be talking about how does the energy flow through an ecosystem. My next question is going to be matter. Elijah, what is matter? All right, not a problem, not a problem. Leighton, what is matter? Leighton? Okay. It's anything that takes up space. It's basically anything that has mass and takes up space. So when we refer this back to, again, Mufasa and the circle of life. So what actually happens to matter, Streaker? Yeah. Okay. All right. So it's not just energy we're talking about. We're talking about everything. I mean, there's all kinds of different matter in one organism that is when it's consumed by another organism gets passed along. So, it comes back to this whole thing about what Dalton said matter is not created nor destroyed, it's only rearranged. So the matter isn't being destroyed, it doesn't disappear, it's just being repurposed, it's being reused in another way. All right. So coming on to the next slide here, it says matter in ecosystem may change forms, but it never leaves the ecosystem. The movement of matter through a living and non-living part of an ecosystem is a continuous cycle. So it is important that we know this right here. This is something we want to make sure that we remember. So it never leaves the ecosystem. Now there's some caveats to that. Let's say I go out and I cut down a tree and I take the tree home. I go out to the forest and I cut a tree and I take the tree back to the city and I burn it as firewood. Okay, matter has left that ecosystem. But in the natural order of things, the matter doesn't leave the ecosystem. It just changes shape. It dies, it gets absorbed, it regrows, and it's just a never ending cycle over and over again. So, Hima, you doing all right today? Okay. So, Hima, a long time ago, beginning of school year, when we were talking about ecosystems earlier, I introduced a term to you that meant living things, the living part of an ecosystem. Do you remember what that term was called? Okay. By raising your hand, does anybody remember what the living part of an ecosystem is called? Okay, Holden was first out of the gate. What was it, Holden? Nope. Surpath, you were the second one. Okay. Jagadish, what is the term that we use for the living part of an ecosystem? Okay. Let me ask it this way. Shrieker, what is the non living part of an ecosystem called? Okay, Hema, say either one, either a living or a non living part. It is biotic. Very good. And Akriti, what would the non living part be called? Abiotic. So the word bio meaning life, biotic means it is alive or it has been alive, and abiotic is non living. So when we come back to these slides, it says the movement of matter through a living, the biotic, and the non-living, the abiotic parts of an ecosystem is a continuous cycle. They are all interrelated to one another, and they're actually very dependent on one another. All right, moving onward, have this little diagram right here, and it shows you the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, and the biosphere. And in the atmosphere, it says air, and the hydrosphere says water, lithosphere is earth, and biosphere is life. Jacob, what do all those things have in common, or how is that all related? What does this drawing actually show us? Okay, it shows us an ecosystem, but trying to go a little off on a tangent there. Ramchan, I'm sorry I didn't see you say that earlier, as far as knowing what the piece was. Elijah? Exactly. It's all connected. If you look at it, there's arrows pointing from each sphere to the other sphere. So for the ecosystem to survive, for the biosphere to prosper, all these things are connected to one another. Now, if I, let's say, came in here and got rid of the biosphere, the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, and the atmosphere, they would still be there. I'm not going to, those aren't going to go away just because all the life on our planet is done. But now, if I remove the hydrosphere, the atmosphere and the biosphere, or the atmosphere would probably still be there, but the biosphere would go away. If I remove the atmosphere, probably would lose the hydrosphere and the biosphere. And obviously, if I took the lithosphere away, none of it would be here because it's all centered around the Earth, anyways. But to have a healthy ecosystem, all these things are connected together. They're all interrelated to each other. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. All right. So you learned about various cycles in the atmosphere, hydrosphere, and the lithosphere in sixth grade. Now we're going to examine cycles in the biosphere. You should have learned about them in the sixth grade. So, three of the most important cycles in the ecosystem are the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. By a show of hands, who has learned about the water cycle? About half of you. Think the other half might not be paying attention, but okay, very good. I'm going to lower everybody's hands. How many of you learned about the carbon cycle? Okay. Not quite as many about the carbon cycle. And lastly, how many the nitrogen cycle? Okay. So let's look at these cycles real quick. So the first one, the water cycle, this is the one that most of us have learned about. And again, this is a one that should be talked about in fifth and sixth grade. Just in a nutshell, you get water in lakes and streams and rivers and ponds. It evaporates, that water goes up into the atmosphere. Transpiration from plants, and that's the part of cellular respiration where that water is released, goes up in the atmosphere. It condenses, makes clouds and whatnot. Then we have precipitation, which falls down and that runs off of mountains and gathers in low-lying areas back into streams and goes back to the ocean and rivers and fills up the groundwater, and it cycles again and goes back the same. It's just the water cycle. Water just keeps getting reused and reused and reused. This one breaks my heart. I think 3 or 4 of you said you learned about the carbon cycle. Guys, that's what we've been studying for the last 3 weeks was the carbon cycle. You guys didn't learn anything from me. Just joking. The carbon cycle basically says that we have CO2 in our atmosphere. It gets absorbed by plants. The plants make glucose, which is used by plants, consumed by animals. When that is done, it is released again as carbon dioxide. That is the carbon cycle. So it goes from the atmosphere into plants, into organisms to be used and released back into the atmosphere. Simple carbon cycle. The last one, and this is the one that most people haven't learned about, is the nitrogen cycle. And the nitrogen cycle, basically what happens is through the decay process where organic material is decayed, also even through lightning strikes to some extent, nitrogen is fixed into the soil, meaning it is attached into molecules that are going to be absorbed by the plant. The plant absorbs them, and in the plant and in animals, proteins are made. These proteins are made which are required for building of the organism, building our bodies, building the plants, building the trees. This stuff is vital for the growth of the organism. One of the things you may or may not be aware of, but like if you drive down the road right now, you start to see this time of year a lot of trucks out at people's houses. They may be coming to your house, and they're spraying things on your yard care businesses. And what they're doing is one of the things they're spraying on the yards or spreading on the yards is nitrogen, because nitrogen helps promote growth. So when they put the nitrogen out on your grass and it rains and we get some sun, your lawns will start to turn green very, very quickly because that nitrogen is being used to build back up the chloroplast and the chlorophyll, so photosynthesis can start taking back as we come into the spring cycle. Any questions on that? These, and you're going to have access to these later. Study Jam, like if I click on Study Jam, it opens up and it looks like this right here. You can watch a video to learn a little bit more about the nitrogen cycle. You can do a little test. It'll talk to you about the nitrogen cycle. I'm not so much worried that we do those. I've actually stolen this PowerPoint. Like teachers do, we share stuff. I joke around when I say steal it. I like this guy, Mr. Parr. He teaches along the lines of what I want you guys to learn. So I'm using a lot of his material. When I go and I post these slides at the end of the lesson today, you'll be able to go back. And if you want to look at these links, you'll be able to see different stuff on them. That's all it is. Like the very first link, that was actually a link to that YouTube video. And we're going to watch a link at the end of the lesson today, which is another YouTube video. But I'm not so much worried right now about you guys doing study jams or anything like that. So, but yeah, they're just links to other stuff to learn about what's on the slide. Good question. Okay. So here it says, why are the water, carbon, and nitrogen cycles important? And this is kind of an important thing to know. All 3 cycle elements necessary for life throughout the atmosphere, soil, and living organisms. So nitrogen, carbon, and in turn, water are all 3 compounds that are extremely important for all living animals, or all living organisms, excuse me, not just animals, plants as well. All right. Energy also cycles continuously through the environment. Energy is the ability to do work or to cause change. That is actually the definition of energy right here. This is the ability to do work or to cause change. Energy is essential to all living things. So where does this energy come from? And let me see, somebody I have yet to call, not pick on. Miss Rooney, how are you doing today? Good to hear this. Um, so, ma'am, where does all energy come from? And you think correctly. So, energy comes directly or indirectly from the sun. So, now again, I've said this before. I can't use energy from the sun. I mean, I don't have solar panels. I can't walk outside. It does go, "Ah," and fill up my body full of energy. I have to eat it through the plants or animals that eat the plants. So that's an indirect source, but all that energy is originating from the sun. The plants convert it. I eat the plants, or something else eats the plants, and I eat that. And so we get the energy indirectly from the sun. Anybody have any questions on that? I mean, we've talked about that quite a bit in photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Nope, sorry, Chopper, we cannot eat the sun. Looks like a big orange, but it's not. Wait, what's going on here? Uh, that I'm very happy to hear that, sir. No problem being late. I'm glad he came home. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the chat. So, all right. So moving onwards and upwards. Hold on. I heard the beep. Somebody did something. Yes, Leighton. No question. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so organisms attain the energy they need in different ways. This is kind of a neat little chart right here that breaks it down pretty easy for us. Obviously, we have the sun. It provides energies to something called producers. Producers make food and oxygen. They give this food and oxygen to the consumers. Consumers, as a waste product, give back elements and carbon dioxide back to the producers, and then they make waste, and that waste material goes to the decomposers. The producers also have waste materials, which go to the decomposers. The decomposers will break down this waste material and return essential nutrients and elements back to the producers. So after the sun, this is all a big cycle. The only thing that's not getting cycled is energy. Energy does not get cycled through and through the system. It goes from producers to organisms, or producers to decomposers, and it stops at that point. Sometimes the decomposers will also get some energy from its consumers, but the energy never goes back into the producers. So it's not a cycle. Everything else, all the matter is cycled, just not the energy. All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is producers. Um, let's see here. Anya, how you doing? Good to hear. What is a producer? What do you think a producer is? Okay, it produces stuff. Jagadish. Okay, yeah, especially when we're talking about the ecosystem, and I guess I should have been a little bit more specific about that. But a producer does make things. But yes, a producer is an organism that captures energy from sunlight and changes it into chemical energy. Producers are called autotrophs. That's an important word that you're going to want to make sure you know because they make their own food. And producers are a source of food for other organisms. So producers are photosynthetic bacteria. So there's some bacteria that have photosynthesis going on, algae, and plants. These are examples of the producers. So they're the ones that are having photosynthesis take place in them. Those are your producers. Consumers. Akriti, what do you think a consumer is? Okay, pretty good definition. Let's see. Nolan, you had your hand up as well. Is there something else you might want to add to that or clarify on that? Okay, Shrieker, what do you have to say? Okay, let's see what it gives us for the definition here. An organism that gets its energy by eating or consuming other organisms. Now, those other organisms can be producers. Remember, organism is anything that is alive. So, yeah, it gets its energy by eating or consuming other organisms. They are heterotrophs. This is another word that you want to know. This is the opposite of autotroph because they get their energy by feeding on other organisms. So, where autotroph makes its own food, the heterotrophs get their energy by getting it from something else. And then finally, there are different types based on what it consumes. So, good definitions, everybody. Very good. All right, so let's look at our different kind of consumers. The first one is the herbivore, a consumer that feeds on plants or algae. And they show here zebras, squirrels, elephants. We could add in all kinds of other things horses, cows, bison. You know, there's a whole list of different things that are just strictly herbivores. Um, an herbivore can eat something else besides plants or algae. It just gets no energy from it. And the kind of example that I use on this, imagine you have a cow and it's in the field, it's eating grass, and it takes a big bite out of grass, and the grass has a bunch of grasshoppers in it. So it's not going to spit the grass out to get rid of the grasshoppers. It's just going to continue to chew. It's going to swallow the grass and the grasshoppers, but it will not derive any energy from the grasshoppers. Does that kind of make sense? Yes, Shrieker? Well, most insectivores, I mean, that is falling loosely into the omnivore category. Most things that feed on insects also feed on plant material, which makes them omnivores. Not always, but mostly. And I think this is just a much broader picture than that, breaking down all the little subclasses. If it's strictly eating insects only. Jacob, what are you asking? What is that? The insectivore? It's just something that just eats insects. I mean, if you start to look at like possum, Possums don't eat a lot of plant material, but they eat tons of insects. Right. But that would have to be like a subspecies of a or subgrouping, not species, subgrouping of a carnivore because it's eating only other organisms that are not producers. Okay. The next category is the omnivore. Now, this is a consumer that feeds on both plant and animals. We, as humans, are omnivores. Even if you have chosen to live your life as a vegetarian or a vegan, you are still an omnivore. Just because you choose not to eat animals does not mean you cannot get energy from animals. It's still possible, you just choose not to. So just because you eat only plants does not make you an herbivore. You're still an omnivore by species. Um, Somebody did ask me an interesting question. I guess there is a tick that when it bites you, you can't eat meat. It makes you sick. That does not mean all of a sudden you're strictly an herbivore. That just means you unfortunately have a disease. Your body can still actually break the proteins down. It just makes you sick to do it. So you don't want to do it, if that makes sense. The next category of consumer is the carnivore. This is the one that just feeds on other animals. And much like the herbivores, it can eat plant based material. However, it does not derive any energy from plant based material. It's, it cannot dissolve the cellulose that holds the energy in most plant material. So it gets its energy from meat. And then the last consuming group is the scavenger. These are animals that feed on dead things, earthworms, vultures, and raccoons. I kind of argue with the raccoon. Well, the raccoon is a big scavenger. It can also get its energy. I mean, it catches crawfish, it can catch fish, it can catch insects, but it typically will eat dead animals. It's a thief. It likes to steal things that somebody else has done the work. And I think the same is can be said with a vulture. I've never heard of a vulture actually hunting, but I think if it really had to, it could kill something and still be able to eat it. Any questions on? Oh yes, hawks are definitely carnivores. They are predatory animals, birds of prey. Yes, Jacob. So what that means is that they are having a hard time finding food. Now, um, by choice, they will always hunt live, but when things are a little bit on the scarce side, they will eat dead food. You're welcome. Yeah, no, they're definitely not omnivores. Arsh, you have a question? They can't get energy from, they have to get their energy from meat. Their bodies cannot break down plants. All right. The next slide, we're almost done, guys and ladies. The decomposers. An organism that breaks down dead plant and animal matter into simpler compounds. Decomposers return matter to the soil and water where it may be used again and again and again. And some examples of this are bacteria and fungi, just to name a few. Now, I am going to try to play a song. We'll see if it works this time. Uh, okay. Well, that kind of didn't work out too well. You can come back and look at it after I post the slides. Um, so interesting thought, if there were no decomposers, all the forests and everything out there would just build up, so we'd actually get covered in all the dead organic material because it would never break down on us. Yeah, I don't know why. It plays very well, Chopper, when I play it by myself, but as soon as I start to share it, it starts skipping and stuff. Yes, I am going to put the slideshow up here with the video as soon as we're done. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video right now.